Clara Jensen never imagined her life could pivot because of a dare, tossed casually into the smoky air of a crowded party high above the lights of San Francisco. She had always been the dependable one, the one who showed up on time, turned in assignments early, and followed every rule to the letter. From her small-town Oregon upbringing to the polished halls of her architecture program, Clara had been defined by words like steady, disciplined, safe. Her designs were clean, elegant, structurally flawless, but never risky, never wild, never alive. Until that night. The party was cramped and overheated, pulsing with cheap wine and relentless music. Clara stood near the window, sipping water, trying not to feel entirely out of place. That's when Beth, eyes lit with mischief, pulled up an article on her phone. Julian Cade, the prodigy pianist turned tech mogul, is reportedly renting a private soundproof suite at Bloom Conservatory. Just him, a piano, and silence. No press, no streams, no audience, Beth added, voice tinged with curiosity. Just him and whatever ghosts he's trying to play out of his system. Julian Cade, once the youngest solo performer at Carnegie Hall, then the mind behind Cade Audio, the app that reshaped music as the world knew it. And then he vanished. No interviews, no concerts, only rumors. Maybe he's hiding, someone said, or healing. Beth turned to Clara, grin spreading. You always sketch buildings and beams, things that hold. What would happen if you drew something alive in a moment that could collapse? Clara laughed. The dare sounded absurd. I'm serious, Beth pressed. Sneak in, sit in the back, sketch him. Just once. That's the bet. Clara wasn't impulsive. She wasn't reckless. But that evening her heart was sore, raw from a brutal critique by her professor. Technically sound, he had said, but there's no risk, no soul. Maybe that was why, as Beth's challenge hung in the air, Clara quietly nodded. All right, she said, lips barely moving. A foolish dare, a reckless whim. But maybe, just maybe, it was the start of something real. Clara never truly thought she would go, but just before midnight the next evening, she found herself standing before the heavy wooden door to Julian Cade's private suite, sketchbook pressed tightly to her chest, her heart pounding so loudly she could almost hear it in her ears. She didn't know what had brought her this far, pride, impulse, or a flicker of curiosity she had always refused to entertain. The door gave a soft click as it opened. Clara stepped inside, barely breathing. The room was bathed in warm amber light, stretching across the high ceilings and polished wooden floor. No stage, no audience, just a Steinway grand piano, and a man seated with his back to her. Julian Cade. He wasn't wearing a shirt. His presence was immediate, unignorable, not because it was provocative, but because it was honest. Bare skin, sculpted in soft light. Not perfect, not posed, just real. His shoulders were broad, defined. The blades of his back shifted slightly with breath. His spine curved gently downward, like a silent melody resting beneath his skin. He looked like something ancient and restless, like a sculpture that had decided to exhale. Clara felt like an intruder, and yet she couldn't look away. She had spent years drawing structures, angles, and beams and tension points, but never something that held life this fragile and this powerful. He sat still, hands resting on the keys. His dark brown hair fell messily around his temples, like sleep had only just released him. Clara slowly pulled out her sketchbook. Her hands trembled, but she began to draw. The curve of his spine, the gentle rise of muscle near his ribs, the shadow where light kissed his shoulder. Each line felt like she was sketching something sacred. She didn't know how long passed, 5 minutes, 10, before he stirred, just the slightest tilt of his head, as if sensing a shift in the air. Then he turned. Clara froze, pencil suspended in air. His eyes found hers, steady, deep, unreadable. For a heartbeat, the entire room went still. He didn't flinch. didn't cover himself. He just looked at her, as if she belonged there. "No one ever dares to watch me when I'm not performing," he said, voice low and even, like a note held too long. Clara flushed crimson, backing away, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. I'm sorry," she stammered, moving toward the door. But before she could leave, his voice stopped her again, calm, quiet. "What's your name?" "Clara?" He nodded slowly. "Come back tomorrow, Clara." And somehow she knew she would. Clara didn't sleep that night. She lay in her tiny rented room, staring up at the cracked ceiling, her mind echoing with the memory of Julian's eyes, his quiet smile, and that voice, deep and unhurried, whispering like a note that wouldn't fade. "Come back tomorrow, Clara." She didn't know why those words had settled so deeply in her chest. Julian hadn't commanded her. It hadn't been a polite request either. It felt inevitable, as if he already knew she would return. And he was right. The next afternoon, Clara told no one. She slipped her sketchbook into her bag and boarded the subway toward Bloom Conservatory, her heart beating faster than usual. This time, there was no hesitation, no sneaking. When she arrived, the assistant at the front desk barely looked up before nodding, as if she'd been expected. Julian was waiting. When she opened the door, the room was different. No piano, no spotlight, just a warm space, lit gently, with a small table and 2 cups of coffee steaming quietly between them. Julian sat there, clothed this time, but still with that same strange calm. He motioned for her to sit, wordlessly. And somehow Clara obeyed, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. They sat across from each other, silent. It was Julian who spoke first. "Why did you really come here?" A simple question, but it found the softest part of her. Clara bit her lip, opened her mouth, then closed it again. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know, I just wanted to see if I could be brave, even once." Julian tilted his head slightly, and something in his eyes softened. "And did you feel brave?" She gave a quiet laugh. "I was terrified." He smiled too, a small, honest curve of his mouth. "Good," he said. "That means you still have something to lose. Fear means hope." Clara didn't understand why she felt safe here, with a man who was still mostly a stranger. But something unspoken had started to form in that room. Not love, not yet, but a thread. Thin, quiet, binding them gently together across the silence. That day, there was no mention of music, no talk of sketches, but as Clara stood to leave, Julian spoke just once more. "Tomorrow night," and she nodded. The evenings became a quiet ritual. No one spoke of it. There were no messages, no formal invitations, but each night, as dusk crept in, Clara would take a different turn, away from her usual route home, and head instead toward Bloom Conservatory, toward a quiet room and a man who waited inside. They didn't do much. Often, they simply sat across from one another. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. But the silence was never awkward. It was the kind of silence that made you feel heard, even when you hadn't said a word. Julian wasn't chatty. He asked simple questions, but they were sharp, precise, cutting through layers Clara hadn't realized she'd built. "What do you remember most about the house you grew up in?" A simple question, but it made Clara pause, sift through years of memory. "The wind through the door in winter," she said. "It always sounded like someone whispering something you weren't supposed to hear." Julian nodded slowly, like he'd known that sound all his life. The more they met, the more Clara realized that Julian wasn't like anyone she had ever known. He didn't rush. He didn't pretend to care, but he was present, fully, quietly, devastatingly present. He listened as she talked about school, about drawings she'd never shown anyone. One evening, she brought a few sketches, intending to skim through them, but Julian sat beside her, studying each line like it held a secret worth waiting for. And slowly, Clara began to study him the same way. She noticed how he paused after speaking, as if pulling words from a long, forgotten place. How his laugh softened the air. How his hands that had once commanded entire concert halls, trembled just slightly when he turned a page in her sketchbook. Neither of them named what was growing between them, but it was there, undeniable, silent, like a song without melody. Emotion had never been named between them. There were no confessions, no lingering glances, no intentional touches, but it was there, quiet and steady, like a melody playing beneath every silence they shared. And then, one night, something shifted. Clara arrived later than usual. A light drizzle had soaked her sleeves, and the chill of the wind still clung to her skin. When she stepped into the familiar room, Julian was already there, standing silently by the tall window, watching the city lights blur in the rain. One hand held a mug of steaming tea, its warmth fogging the edge of his cheek. The other hand rested loosely in the pocket of his dark wool sweater. He turned when the door clicked shut. Their eyes met. Something in the air slowed. His gaze didn't rush, but it didn't avoid her either. It held a quiet expectation and a hint of something vulnerable, like he'd half prepared himself to be disappointed. "I thought you'd changed your mind," Julian said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I almost did," Clara admitted. "I thought maybe if I stayed home and stayed quiet, everything would just stop. But then I realized I didn't want it to." He said nothing, just set his mug down and walked toward her, slowly, deliberately, like each step mattered more than he could say. "When you're here," he said, standing just a breath away, "I remember what it's like to want something, not because it's smart or necessary, but because it's beautiful and real." She didn't know what to say. His words reached into her chest, peeled back every layer of restraint, and held her heart in his hands without ever touching her. Clara inhaled sharply. Her thoughts spun, but her body had already decided. She lifted her hand, gently brushing the inside of his wrist. He looked at her, didn't move, didn't flinch, and she didn't pull away. 1 second, 2, 3, then he touched her back, lightly, not trembling, just answering, a quiet harmony to the note she'd begun in silence. They didn't kiss, there was no need. Julian sat first, then glanced at her. Clara joined him, their shoulders touched. Her hand remained in his. They stayed like that for a long time. No words, no movement. The room warmed around them as if time had folded itself inward and left only this, their breath and each other. Julian rested his head gently against her shoulder, not with romance, but with trust, as though for the first time in years, he allowed himself to stop holding everything together. Clara closed her eyes, letting the weight of him settle into her like a promise. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel the need to prove anything. She didn't have to be strong or clever or worthy. She just had to be there. As she stood to leave, Julian spoke, softly, barely audible. "Thank you for coming back." Clara didn't answer. She just squeezed his hand, slightly, but with certainty. The line between them had finally vanished, not in a rush, but with the gentlest of touches. But they didn't know that in their quietest moment, the outside world had already started to slip in. Not with noise, but with a phone call. Silent, calculated, and sharp as a blade. That afternoon, Clara was alone in her small apartment, adjusting lines on a sketch for her next assignment. Late sunlight stretched across the wooden floor, catching the edge of her sleeve. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She hesitated, then picked up. "Clara Jensen." A man's voice, low, controlled. "This is Marcus Cade." The room seemed to still. Marcus Cade. The name needed no introduction. Julian's older brother, CEO of Cade Audio, the face of everything Julian had walked away from. "What is this about?" Clara asked, keeping her voice calm. "This isn't a threat," Marcus said. "I'm not here to intimidate you. I'm speaking as the man who once had to drag my brother out of something most people don't come back from." Clara said nothing. "Julian's not a gentle tune, you know. He's a full-blown symphony, chaotic, relentless. If you haven't seen him fall apart, then trust me, you don't really know him." Each word fell like ice. "I know he's been meeting you at Bloom Conservatory. I know he's starting to forget why he left the world in the first place." Clara's grip on the phone tightened. "Do you think this thing between you can survive the spotlight? You think you'll be okay when the press starts digging into who you are, where you come from? They won't be kind, Clara. And he'll disappear again." A pause. "The thing is, I don't think you want to hurt him," Marcus continued. "I believe you mean well, but sometimes loving someone means not being the one standing beside them." The line went dead. Clara stood still, the silence in the room now deafening. Outside, the wind had picked up. Her shadow on the floor trembled ever so slightly. That night, she still went to Bloom Conservatory, still sat beside Julian, still listened as he spoke about an old book, a melody he was rewriting. She smiled, she nodded, but deep inside her, something had started to stir, a quiet, uncertain note. The beginning of an ending. Clara never told Julian about the call from Marcus. But from that night on, something in her began to shift, quietly, slowly, like a door inching closed. The evenings at Bloom Conservatory continued. They still sat side by side. Julian still spoke of melodies he was rewriting, still asked her questions that made her pause and think. But inside Clara, a dissonant note had begun to ring. She stopped bringing her sketchbook. Not because she didn't want to draw, but because she was afraid that if she did, she would have to capture what she was slowly losing. Julian didn't notice at first. He was observant, but he also trusted deeply, trusted Clara, trusted what they were building. Until one evening, when he smiled and handed her a half-finished sheet of music, asking, "What do you think this part needs?" Clara didn't answer right away. She looked at the page, then at him, and couldn't say the thing that had been pressing against her chest for days. That night, she stayed later than usual. She didn't sleep. She sat in the dark, listening to the faint hum of the city beyond her window, like a symphony with no center. The next morning, Clara rose early. She didn't go to Bloom Conservatory. Instead, she wandered through the city, retracing steps she had taken alone before Julian. She went looking for herself. She rented a tiny studio in an old artist quarter. She pulled out old sketches she had hidden in drawers, and she began to draw again. Not for anyone, not for praise, not even for Julian, but for herself. Longing filled his strokes. Loss became light. The drawings were no longer soft or perfect. They were raw, honest, nearly aching. One afternoon, she dropped off a canvas at a small gallery in the Mission District. The gallery owner, an older man with silver hair and round glasses, studied her work, then looked at her quietly. "You're the one who draws him," he said. Clara froze. I don't know what you mean." But he only smiled gently. "I've seen a lot of artists draw because they're chasing something, but you draw to remember." And that night, for the first time in many nights, Clara let herself hope. Maybe love wasn't about walking away to protect someone from yourself. Maybe love was learning how to stay when the storm arrives. The call came on a rainy afternoon. Raindrops clung to the window like time itself had slowed, each second stretching endlessly. Clara sat by her desk, phone in hand, staring at the number she knew by heart. She had asked herself for days, is he still waiting, or has he learned to forget? There was no answer, only the echo between two heartbeats. Finally, not because of logic, but because her heart couldn't bear the silence any longer, she called. Julian was alone in his office, the warm light casting a golden haze over his shoulders. He wasn't working, just watching the city through the glass, dim streetlights, wet roads, and her absence playing like a wordless song he couldn't turn off. When the phone rang, he turned instantly. Her name lit up the screen. His heart skipped a beat. He picked up on the second ring. "Clara," he said, barely above a whisper, like calling out a dream that had returned unexpectedly. There was a pause. Then, With a trembling voice, she spoke. "I'm sorry. I thought I had to leave to protect the best of what we had. But all I did was run away from the only place I've ever truly belonged." Julian closed his eyes. His chest felt like it had cracked open, only to be mended by the sudden return of something he'd stopped hoping for. "I'm home," he said, simply, honestly, like everything they had ever been. That night, Clara stood in front of his apartment, the door she had once entered with uncertain steps, now trembling again because she knew exactly where it led. Snow was falling softly. She hadn't even knocked when the door opened. Julian was waiting. Their eyes met. And for a heartbeat, the world stepped back. No words. He walked toward her slowly, cautiously, as if she might vanish if he moved too fast. Then his arms wrapped around her, secure, gentle, whole. Clara buried her face in his chest, right where his heartbeat echoed loud and steady. She breathed in the scent she hadn't realized she missed. Warm cedar, a hint of sea air, and something like home. His hand rested lightly at the back of her neck, not to hold, just to touch. But that touch alone broke her. Tears slipped free, quiet and unstoppable, like the rain falling earlier that day. They stood that way for a long time. No one counted the seconds. No one needed to speak. Julian held her closer, as if trying to memorize the shape of her. "I'm not sure how much of you I still get to keep," he murmured, "but I never stopped waiting for you to come back." Clara clutched his shirt, terrified that letting go would mean losing him again. She looked up, eyes red but steady. "I don't want perfect love. I just want someone who will walk through the cracks with me." Julian lowered his head. His lips met hers in a kiss, gentle, patient, certain. When his lips brushed gently against hers, the world seemed to hold its breath. There was no crash, no blinding light, only a silence so sacred it felt like grace, where old wounds were soothed by a familiar breath, where the unsaid was spoken through a single kiss. It wasn't the kiss of new lovers, it was a quiet vow between two souls who had once lost each other and now, without condition or promise, were choosing again. In that moment, Clara understood she didn't need forever. She just needed this, real, deep, and wholly present. It wasn't a beginning. It wasn't forgiveness. It was return, not "we're starting over, we're still here." We never truly left. They didn't say anything more that night. They didn't have to. In that silence, something unspoken was understood. That from this moment on, they wouldn't just find each other again, but learn how to stay. They didn't call it starting over, nor did they need to say things like, "let's try again," or "give us another chance." Neither of them felt the need to define a love that had never truly disappeared. It had only gone quiet for a while, silenced by fear, pain, and words that weren't ready to be spoken. But now, nothing needed to be said. Clara didn't move in with Julian permanently, yet nearly every evening found her back in the apartment where the kitchen light was always on, where a coat hung waiting for her and a warm cup of tea stood at 9 p.m. She kept her own world intact, her small apartment, her familiar studio, but Julian's presence had become essential in her quiet hours. They didn't label their relationship, they didn't call it anything grand, but everything they did said the same thing. "I'm still choosing you." In the mornings, they woke together, sometimes early for Julian's meetings, sometimes late because Clara wanted to linger under the covers, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath the pillow. Julian made coffee, black, strong, the only thing that could clear his mind. Clara still preferred hot cocoa, or Earl Grey with a hint of cinnamon. Their different habits didn't need to be changed. They were the small, distinct notes that made up the quiet harmony between two people who were never the same, but never out of sync. Clara began taking on more art projects, this time with confidence. Her sketches carried new tones, not just soft landscapes or polished still lifes, but vivid, raw emotions. Sometimes it was Julian's hands holding a cup of coffee, or his back lit by warm lamplight, or her own eyes as she imagined how he saw her. She didn't need to draw his face for people to know. It was the light he gave that shone through her work. Julian remained absorbed in his business, but Clara noticed something new: white spaces in his calendar, evenings with no calls, mornings with no meetings, time for Clara, or sometimes just time for silence. Quiet jazz playing, pages turning, pencils gliding over paper. They didn't need big gestures. Some nights, Julian simply sat watching Clara draw, his gaze never leaving her hand. Sometimes Clara would walk over and kiss his forehead, then return to the couch, just enough to say, "I still see you. I still choose you." Their love wasn't a blazing flame anymore. It was steady, certain, a hearth fire that burned quietly through the night. No one needed to witness it. No one else had to understand. The old wounds were still there, like scars that never fully fade, but they learned to live with them without denial or shame. Some nights Clara woke from restless dreams and Julian would simply hold her hand. Other times he stared long at an unread email, the weight in his eyes unspoken, but Clara would rest her hand on his shoulder, and it was enough. She understood. They didn't talk about someday. They didn't make long-term plans. But each morning, Julian brewed her favorite tea, and each night, Clara set her phone aside to give him her final hour. They needed no promises. They just chose each other. Every single day.
A millionaire patient pretends to be in a coma, but when he hears his nurse's confession, everything changes. The room smelled like antiseptic and old money. Everything was white: white curtains, white bedsheets, white silence. In the center of it all lay a man who hadn't moved in 10 days. His name was Julian Blackwell, 33, heir to one of the oldest luxury hotel empires in the country. A man who once commanded boardrooms now lay still, a thin scar on his temple, the only mark of the crash that had nearly taken his life. Or so the world believed. What they didn't know was this: Julian Blackwell was not in a coma. He was pretending. Outside the thick glass door of his private hospital suite, muffled voices broke the quiet. "I'm telling you," came Damien's voice, Julian's cousin, slick-hamed, always overdressed, always smiling when he thought no one was watching. "This is our chance. The board's restless. If we don't step in now, we might lose everything." "Step in." The voice was colder, smoother. Catherine Blackwell, Julian's stepmother. "No, Damien, we don't." "Step in. We take control. He's vulnerable. His assets are vulnerable. The board won't wait forever, and neither should we." Damien hesitated. "But the lawyer," Julian's estate attorney, still insists. "That attorney won't be a problem for long," Catherine interrupted. "He's loyal, yes, but isolated. We keep pushing the narrative. Julian may never wake up, and if we keep the nurse compliant, this'll be over within weeks." Inside the room, Julian's heart pounded beneath the surface of his motionless body. So it was true. He had suspected the crash wasn't an accident. A last-minute trip to the Hamptons had ended with a shredded guardrail, a flipped car, and a diagnosis of non-traumatic coma, but Julian had regained consciousness within 2 days and chosen not to speak. Not yet. He needed time. He needed to know who had betrayed him, and now, at least partly, he did. The door opened with a soft hiss. Footsteps. Slower this time. Different. Julian knew that rhythm already. Gentle, careful, measured. "Nora!" "Good morning, Mr. Blackwell." Her voice was soft but clear. No false sweetness. "It's just me." She moved around the bed with calm efficiency, checking his vitals, adjusting his blanket, brushing his hair back slightly with a practiced hand. There was no pity in her touch, only professionalism and something else. Something Julian couldn't name yet. He had watched her through the slit of barely opened eyes when she wasn't looking, the way she read aloud at night, the way she hummed to herself when she changed his IV. She treated him like a human being, not a lost cause. And she never said anything cruel. Not like Catherine. Not like Damien. "Your levels look stable today," Nora said quietly, scribbling something into the chart. "That's good." She sat beside him, sighing softly. "I don't know if you can hear me," she added, her voice lower now, almost conspiratorial. "But I think you can, just a feeling." Julian felt heat rise in his chest. Was she about to say something? He listened carefully, heart still. "I took this job because I needed the money. That's not a crime. I didn't ask too many questions because, well, life doesn't let me. But now that I'm here, I see things, I hear things, and they don't sit right." She glanced toward the door. "Your cousin came in yesterday when you were asleep, or, well, asleep. He told someone over the phone that you weren't waking up anytime soon, and the tone in his voice, it scared me," she swallowed. "I don't know what kind of family you have, Mr. Blackwell, but I think they want you gone." Julian's fingers twitched, just a fraction. Nora didn't notice. "I should say nothing," she whispered. "I should just take my paycheck and keep quiet. But I can't. I've lost too much already. I became a nurse to help people, and whether you're listening or not, I won't be part of something that lets someone fade away just because they're inconvenient." She stood slowly. "I'm going to start keeping 2 logs," she murmured. "One for them, and one that's honest." Julian felt something stir in his chest that hadn't moved in a long time. Here's to making. Nora adjusted the IV one last time, then placed a book on the table beside him. "Tonight, I'm going to read to you. Something real. Something human." She walked out without another word. The door clicked shut. And in the stillness, Julian Blackwell blinked once, slow, controlled. He would wait. But not for long. The nights were when the silence felt loudest. After the last round of checks and the cleaning staff left, Nora would dim the lights and sit by Julian's bedside. The only sounds, the soft beep of machines and the wind brushing the high windows of the private recovery wing. It had been 2 weeks since she took the assignment. 2 weeks of watching Julian Blackwell, once a name she had only seen in magazines and headlines, lie still like a statue carved from grief. But something was off, deeply off. She noticed it first with the medications. On her 2nd week, she checked the chart and paused. The sedative dosage hadn't changed, despite no signs of agitation, seizures, or trauma. In fact, it hadn't been reviewed at all. Then came the nutrition logs. The physician's visits were increasingly rare. Vitals were logged but never evaluated. Even the speech therapist who was supposed to visit weekly hadn't shown up once, and yet there was no urgency from anyone. No concern, just polite nods and cold reminders to stick to protocol. She had worked in enough care facilities to know the quiet signs of negligence, but this felt like something else, something intentional. That evening she brought in her own copy of The Little Prince, a book her mother used to read when nights at home felt too dark. She flipped through the pages as she spoke to Julian. "You probably hate this book," she said softly, placing it on the table. "I mean, you're a businessman, practical, hotels, contracts, numbers. But I always liked this one. It's about someone who gets lost and then finds meaning in the simplest things." She reached for his wrist, checking his pulse again. Still steady, still strong. You know, she added, glancing at the IV bag, I asked Dr. Langston yesterday about your sedative dose. He brushed me off, said it was per family request, no adjustment, no taper plan, just status quo. Her voice turned sharp with frustration. I became a nurse to help people get better, not stay stuck. She stood, walked to the window and pressed a hand to the glass. I don't know who you really are, Julian, but I'm starting to believe you're more awake than anyone wants to admit. Her fingers curled into a fist. I'm changing your protocol. Not everything, just a little. I know how to do it without raising alarms. And if anyone asks, I'll take the heat. She turned back to him. But I can't sit by and watch you disappear like this. I've done that before, and I can't do it again. She reached for her notebook and began writing in a second log, one she kept hidden in her locker. A real record of meds, reflex responses, vitals, and her own observations. She didn't notice that Julian's eyes moved slightly beneath their lids. At midnight, she returned with a thermos of chamomile tea and a blanket draped over her shoulders. I should go home, she whispered, but I can't sleep anyway. She sat beside him again, pulled out the book and opened to the first chapter, and then, after a moment of stillness, she closed it. Instead, she spoke, not to fill the air, but to empty her heart. I wasn't supposed to be your nurse, you know, she said. I was filling in for someone else, emergency call. The original nurse backed out last minute. I didn't ask why. Her voice cracked. I thought it was fate. Finally, an assignment that paid enough to help me pay off school loans, get my license back. But now, she leaned forward, elbows on her knees. I heard Catherine say something. In the hallway. She thought I was on break. She said, we just need to keep him sedated until things are finalized. Damien nodded like it was nothing. Nora paused. Her hands trembled. I came here to help, but now I'm afraid I was hired to help someone die. She looked up at Julian, his face still and unmoved. I don't know if you can hear me, but I had to say it out loud. I won't do it. I won't be part of something cruel. She stood slowly, voice barely a whisper. I don't know what's going on. But I'm with you, whether or not you ever wake up. She touched his hand lightly. You're not alone. And then she left, the door closing gently behind her. Inside the room, a single tear slipped from the corner of Julian's eye. He wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have to pretend for much longer. Nora said nothing to the doctors, nothing to the hospital director, nothing to the Blackwell family. But every night she spoke to Julian. She told him about her life in bits and pieces, stories from her early days as a nursing student, patients who had changed her, shifts that broke her, small kindnesses that kept her going. She talked about her father, a quiet plumber who believed that doing good didn't need an audience, it just needed consistency. Julian listened. He couldn't move much yet, couldn't speak, but he heard her. And it was more than the sound of her voice, it was the truth in it. In a world that had taught him to distrust everyone, Nora Ellis spoke like someone who hadn't yet given up on people. Every night, she arrived a little earlier, stayed a little longer. She started experimenting with small neurological stimulation tests, not anything that would raise red flags, just enough to see if his body could respond. A pinch of his palm, a light pressure on his eyelids, gentle sensory cues. One evening, as she was adjusting his blanket, she paused beside him, leaning closer. Julian, she whispered, her voice uncertain. If you can hear me, give me a sign. Anything. Silence. She sighed, shaking her head. Maybe I'm just imagining things, wanting to believe in something that's not there. But then, his index finger moved, just a twitch, barely more than a whisper of motion. But it was real. Nora froze. Her eyes widened. Her breath caught. She leaned in closer. Did you just... There it was again, a slow, deliberate curl of his finger. Nora covered her mouth with both hands. Oh my God, she stood abruptly, nearly knocking over the stool behind her. For a few seconds, all she could do was stare at him, chest rising and falling fast, heart racing. Then she laughed, quiet and breathless, a stunned, joyful sound. "You can hear me?" she said, stepping back to his side. "Julian, you're in there. You've been listening this whole time, haven't you?" She blinked away tears, reaching for his hand. "Okay. Oh, we're going to do this slowly, all right? One finger for yes, nothing for no. Can you understand that?" A pause. Then another curl of his finger. Nora let out a shaky laugh. "This is insane. No one's going to believe this. But I do. I believe you." From that night on, everything changed. Their routine shifted. Now there was a new rhythm, a new language between them. One blink, one twitch, one squeeze. Yes, no, maybe. She brought flashcards, started using a basic alphabet chart. It was slow, sometimes frustrating, but Julian tried. He wanted to try. And Nora? She was patient, careful, and warm. She smiled every time he responded. She never rushed him. She never treated his limitations like burdens. The connection between them deepened. Julian learned her favorite songs, her favorite flavor of coffee, how she used to watch people come and go at the hotel her mom cleaned when she was little, imagining the kind of lives they lived. Nora, in turn, learned things about him he had never told anyone. Not with words, just with looks, reactions, questions she would ask, and the way he would twitch once for yes, stay still for no. "You never wanted this life, did you?" she asked one night, eyes scanning his chart while her fingers gently smoothed the edge of his sleeve, his finger curled. "Yes? You just wanted peace, not power." Another yes. She sat down beside him. "I think I get it. I never wanted to be a nurse just to pay the bills. I wanted to help, but somewhere along the way I started surviving instead of living." Julian moved his hand slightly, trying to reach hers. She took it without hesitation. "I won't let them do this to you," she said. "I don't care what they want. You're coming back. We're going to get you back." In that moment, for the first time in years, Julian Blackwell didn't feel like a name on a contract or a line in a will. He felt human. Because someone had chosen to believe in him, even when he couldn't speak. And now, with her help, he was ready to fight back. In the days that followed, a quiet current of urgency ran beneath every moment Nora and Julian shared. By day, Nora played the obedient nurse, logging routine notes, adjusting the IV with steady hands, nodding politely to Catherine's condescending remarks and Damien's fake concern. But at night, she and Julian became something else. Not just patient and nurse, but partners, co-conspirators, survivors. She had memorized his signals, one twitch for yes, a finger tap for no, a faint breath change when something scared him. They were getting good at this. One evening, as she massaged his left hand to stimulate muscle tone, she whispered, "I know you want to expose them, but we need proof, real proof, and we need to be careful." Julian managed a faint blink, his newest response, then twitched his finger once. Yes, Nora pulled a tiny device from her pocket, a sleek pin-sized camera she had borrowed from her friend in tech support. It wasn't hospital standard issue, but it was discreet, high resolution, and had saved more than one whistleblower in the past. "I'll place it in the medication cabinet," she said softly. "That's where Damien and Catherine always talk when they think no one's around. I've seen them whispering, giving instructions to the night staff. It's time someone else saw what they're doing." Julian's eyes flickered in agreement. That night, when she was certain no one was watching, Nora slipped into the medroom. With gloved hands and a steady heartbeat, she hid the camera inside the corner of a ceiling panel, just above the fridge where the controlled substances were stored. The motion sensor clicked to life. Now they waited. 2 nights later, the plan paid off. Nora returned to retrieve the camera early that morning before the cleaners arrived. She watched the footage in the break room, headphones in, laptop open, heart pounding. At first, just silence, then footsteps. Damien's voice, "She's getting too involved," he muttered. "That nurse, she's not stupid." "Let her ask questions," Catherine replied calmly. As long as she doesn't start writing reports, we're fine. Besides, we'll be done soon. We give it 2 more weeks, then we file the DNR motion." Nora froze. "Julian has no living will," Damien said. "Won't that raise red flags?" "We'll claim a verbal directive. I've already spoken to the hospital board liaison. They're sympathetic. They want the mess gone." "And the lawyer?" "I'm working on it. He'll be cut out of the next meeting." Then came the words that chilled Nora's blood. "All that's left is to keep him sedated," Catherine said, "and I want that nurse out of here once the paperwork's ready. She's seen too much." Nora sat in silence, hands trembling, as the video finished. She saved the file 3 times, once to her USB, once to an encrypted cloud server, and once on her locked phone. Then, with Julian's help, she drafted a message to send it. "Who do we trust?" she asked that night, sitting by his bed with her laptop. Julian blinked once, then once again. Nora hesitated. 2 blinks? She opened her notebook, flipping to a list of names he had painstakingly helped her form letter by letter. At the top, Avery Blake, Julian's longtime personal attorney, loyal, discreet, locked out by the family after Julian's accident. "I'll send it to him," she said. "We'll know what to do." That night, she uploaded the video with a short message. "Mr. Blake, I believe you are the only person who ever truly stood by Julian Blackwell. He is alive, and what's happening here is a crime. This footage proves it. Please help us. Nora Ellis." She hit send. Then she held Julian's hand and whispered, "They won't win." He moved his fingers in hers, just slightly. It was enough. In the early hours of the morning, her phone buzzed. A message from Avery Blake. Subject, Re-U-R-G-E J. Blackwell, received. "I'm on my way. Do not speak to anyone else. Keep him safe. We're not alone in this anymore." Nora turned to Julian, still asleep, but no longer alone. The game had changed. Now it was time to fight back. Julian opened his eyes on a Tuesday morning. It was subtle at first, just a sliver of hazel between his lashes. Nora had been adjusting his oxygen monitor when she noticed the flutter. Her breath caught. "Julian?" His eyes blinked, once, then again, fully. He was awake. For the first time in weeks, his gaze found hers, and something inside her chest tightened. He wasn't just responding with fingers or breath now, he was looking at her. And it was like being seen for the first time. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. "Hi," she whispered. "You're really back." He tried to speak, but his throat was dry, unused. She shook her head gently, placed a finger to her lips. "Don't rush. We'll take it slow. You're safe." She helped him sit up, propped by pillows. It was a delicate process, but they had prepared for this moment. Muscle memory, reflex checks, incremental healing. What they hadn't prepared for was the quiet between them now. Not the silence of fear, but something sacred. Later that evening, she came back after her shift, carrying a thermos of tea and a small notebook. "Thought we might talk," she said. "Real words this time." Julian smiled faintly. His voice was rough, broken, but he managed one syllable. "Tea." She laughed, passing him the cup. They talked in short bursts over the next hour, him mostly listening, nodding, resting. But his eyes never left hers. She told him about the emails with Avery Blake, how he was coming with a legal team, how everything was set in motion. "You'll have control of your estate again," she said. "And justice. You just have to hold on a little longer." Julian didn't answer immediately. Then, softly he rasped, "You held on for me." She nodded, suddenly unable to meet his gaze. A beat passed. The room dimmed around them. Julian's hand reached slowly for hers. "You saved me," he whispered. Nora exhaled sharply, emotion rushing forward like a tide. "I didn't know what I was doing at first," she confessed. "I just knew I couldn't be part of something cruel. But the more I sat here with you, the more I read, the more I talked, She looked down. "I started to care. About the man you are, not the money, not the name. Just you." Julian's eyes softened. "Nora," she shook her head, blinking fast. I know it's not professional. I know I'm not supposed to say this, but I think I'm falling for you, and I hate that it's at the worst possible time." Her voice cracked. "You've been through hell. You don't need someone like me complicating things." Julian's grip on her hand tightened ever so slightly. "You're the only thing that's made any of this make sense." Nora's breath caught. He smiled, weak but real. "You didn't complicate anything. You brought me back." She wiped at her eyes with the sleeve of her cardigan, laughing softly through the tears. "This is insane," she said. "I'm crying over my patient." "I'm not your patient," he whispered. "Not anymore." Silence fell between them again, but it was warm now, like a held breath between two people who knew something had changed. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, and the city hummed beyond the hospital walls. Inside, Julian and Nora sat hand in hand, not yet lovers, not quite healed, but no longer afraid to feel. The war wasn't over, but they had each other now, and that was the start of something neither of them could name, but neither wanted to let go. The sun rose over the city like a silent promise. Inside Julian's penthouse suite at the private hospital, Nora helped him into a tailored gray suit, the first real clothes he had worn in weeks. He was still weak, moving slowly, but his eyes were sharper than they had ever been. "You're sure about this?" Nora asked as she buttoned the cuffs of his shirt. Julian nodded. "I won't hide anymore." Avery Blake arrived precisely at 9 a.m. with 2 assistants and a rolling briefcase full of sealed documents. "The press conference is set for 10. The hospital's boardroom is secure. Damien and Catherine will be there." Julian leaned back in his chair, fingers laced in front of him. "Then let's give them a show." The boardroom was full. Hospital executives, family members, a few well-dressed reporters who had been promised an exclusive on the fate of the Blackwell Empire. Catherine stood at the head of the room, a vision of composed confidence in a cream blazer. Damien just behind her, his smirk barely hidden. "Thank you all for coming," she began smoothly. "As you know, our family has faced an unspeakable hardship with Julian's tragic condition. Today, we'd like to discuss the transfer of temporary executive control." The double doors swung open. All eyes turned, and Julian Blackwell walked in, supported only slightly by a cane, dressed in the unmistakable dignity of someone who had faced death and won. Gasps filled the room. Cameras clicked. Damien turned white. Catherine froze. Julian didn't say a word until he reached the center of the room. Then he laid one hand flat on the table and looked directly at his stepmother. "I see you started without me." You're awake," Catherine stammered. "This is how—" Julian raised a hand. "Save it." He turned to the reporters. "I've been conscious for several weeks now. I was in a coma briefly, yes, but when I woke up I realized something was wrong, very wrong." Avery stepped forward, opened the briefcase and pulled out a small tablet. Julian nodded to Nora, who stood quietly at the back of the room, unnoticed until now. He met her eyes for a split second, enough to ground him. Then he pressed play, the room filled with the voices of Damien and Catherine. "We just need to keep him sedated." "He won't be a problem much longer. We file the DNR once she's out of the picture." Gasps, murmurs. One executive stood, another sat down with a hand over his mouth. Damien tried to speak. That's taken out of context," Julian's voice cut through like a blade. "You tried to erase me, and you almost succeeded. If it hadn't been for one person—" He turned to Nora. "I wouldn't be here." Nora froze as the room turned toward her. Julian continued. "While everyone else was planning their next move, she stayed. She cared. She saved me." Catherine narrowed her eyes. "You fell for the nurse?" Julian looked at her coldly. "No, I chose her, just like she chose not to be complicit in your crime." The board members began murmuring among themselves. Avery took over, announcing pending charges, formal investigations, and the reinstatement of Julian's full authority. Catherine and Damien left the room in silence, their legacy crumbling behind them. Outside the boardroom, away from the chaos, Julian leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. Nora rushed to his side. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it," he corrected. She hesitated, looking around. Everyone saw. "Everyone knows now." He reached for her hand. "Good," he said quietly, "because I want the world to know who saved me, and who I want to be beside me from now on." She looked at him, eyes full. "Julian." But there were no more words needed, not now, because the truth was out, and they were finally free to live it. Nora didn't stay for the applause. She slipped away the moment the boardroom erupted in whispers and camera flashes, ducking through a side door and out into the cold afternoon air. Her hands shook as she pressed the elevator button, chest tight with something more complicated than fear. Julian had survived. He had won. And yet, why did she feel like she was the one running away? She packed her things quietly in the nurse's locker room that night, her thermos, the book she used to read aloud, and, most importantly, the little leather-bound notebook where she had kept every whispered observation, every question, every confession she had ever spoken when she thought Julian was asleep. She knew her time here was over. She couldn't stay, not when the entire world had watched him name her, not when headlines were already spinning her into a modern Florence Nightingale or a gold-digging scandal. She wasn't either. She was just tired and in love, and unsure of what to do with both. She was locking the door when she heard the elevator ding behind her. "Nora?" She turned. Julian stood there. No cane this time. A little steadier on his feet. A winter coat over his suit. His eyes were tired but locked on hers. She inhaled sharply. "You shouldn't be walking around alone." "I'm not," he said. "I came to find you." She looked down. "I was just leaving." "I know." He stepped closer. "That's why I had to come now." He reached into his coat and pulled out the notebook. She froze. "You left this," he said. "You didn't think I'd let it go unread, did you?" Nora's cheeks flushed. "That wasn't meant for anyone," he finished gently. "I know." He opened it to a page near the middle. "I read this part 5 times, he said. "The night you said you were falling for me, and you hated it. Because you were scared. Because you thought I'd see you differently." He closed the notebook and looked up. "I don't." She stared at him. "I didn't fall for the nurse," he said. "I fell for the person who sat beside me when I was more ghost than man. The person who chose to believe I was worth saving, even when she thought no one would ever know." Her eyes brimmed. "Julian." He stepped forward, voice low and certain. "I've had a lifetime of people loving me for my name, my money, my power. You were the first one to love me without any of that." She shook her head. "I didn't mean to—" "I know," he interrupted, "but I did." Silence. Tender. Fragile. Then, softly, he asked, "Will you come back with me? Not to the hospital, not as a nurse, just as yourself." She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "And if I say yes?" "I'll spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice." Her lips trembled. "Okay," she whispered. Then Julian did something he hadn't done since before the crash. He smiled. And Nora stepped forward, into his arms, into the still-beating truth of what they had built, day by day, word by word, one heartbeat at a time, because some love stories don't begin with fireworks, some begin in silence, and grow louder when we finally choose to listen. 1 year later, the Blackwell name meant something different. The scandal had been national news for months. Julian had chosen to stay mostly quiet after the public revelation, letting the evidence and the law speak for itself. The video, the forged documents, and the witness testimony were enough. Catherine Blackwell, once the poised and pristine matriarch of the empire, now sat behind bars in a federal women's prison in upstate New York. The charges: conspiracy to commit attempted manslaughter, attempted medical fraud, obstruction of care. Damien, less careful, more arrogant, had been even easier to prosecute. His emails with private doctors, financial manipulation of Blackwell Hotels' shares, and his own recorded threats had sealed his fate. 15 years without parole. Their names were no longer whispered at black-tie galas or seen on luxury sponsorships. They were footnotes in a story that had turned toward healing. Julian had made sweeping changes. He stepped back from daily operations of the Blackwell hotels and instead devoted himself to something new, the Nora Ellis Foundation, a nonprofit focused on protecting vulnerable patients from medical abuse and supporting whistleblowers in the healthcare system. Nora had resisted the name at first, embarrassed and shy, but Julian insisted. "You gave me back my life," he told her. "Now we help give others theirs." They opened their first pilot program in the very hospital where Julian had been kept. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. But the building felt different now, warmer, brighter. Not just because of the sunlight that streamed through the newly uncovered windows, but because of what they had built inside. The desert retreat was Nora's idea. It wasn't a spa or a resort, just a quiet house tucked into the canyons of New Mexico, far from the city, far from legacy, far from boardrooms and betrayal. They went there every few months. No cell phones, no press, just Nora, Julian, and peace. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon and the sky burned gold, they hiked up a narrow trail behind the house. Nora laughed as Julian pretended to be out of breath. "You own hotels in 5 countries," she teased. "And you're winded after 15 minutes of walking?" "I almost died," he grinned. "Cut me some slack." At the top of the trail was a flat overlook that stretched for miles. Julian reached into his coat. Nora turned just as he knelt down, her breath catching. The ring was simple, a band of rose gold wrapped around a smooth stone of desert jasper, polished but not cut, warm and natural, like her. "I wanted to propose somewhere quiet," he said. "Somewhere like the place where I found myself again, where I found you." Tears welled in her eyes. He held the ring out. "Nora Ellis, you didn't just save me. You saved everything. My life, my name, my hope. Will you marry me? Not the millionaire, not the patient, but just me?" She dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around him. "Yes," she whispered. "Always yes." They married in a garden behind the First Foundation clinic. No press, no cameras, just family, chosen family, and the people they had helped. At the end of the ceremony, Nora looked out at the crowd and spotted something that made her heart stutter. A young girl in scrubs, holding hands with an older woman, smiling through tears. That girl had once emailed the foundation with a single sentence, "I'm scared to speak, but I think something's wrong in my hospital." Now she was applying to nursing school. Because of Nora. Because of Julian. Because of love that hadn't come from perfection, but from persistence. That night, as they sat on a wooden bench, Julian held Nora's hand and looked out across the courtyard, where laughter echoed beneath lanterns strung from tree to tree. He leaned his head against hers. "Do you think they'll ever forget what happened?" She smiled. "Maybe." He turned to her. "Do you want them to?" "No," she said. "Not if it reminds them that good people still exist, that truth can win, that love can outlast betrayal." Julian kissed her forehead, and as the stars blinked awake overhead, they sat together, not as survivors, not as headlines, not as heirs or heroes, just as two people, finally whole, finally free, finally home. Sometimes healing begins in silence. Sometimes love begins with trust. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is believe in someone when the whole world has already walked away. Julian and Nora's story reminds us that no amount of power, wealth, or betrayal can outshine the quiet strength of compassion. That truth, no matter how deeply buried, can rise again, carried by those who dare to care. If this story moved your heart, inspired your soul, or reminded you of the power of forgiveness, please like this video, leave a comment, and most importantly, subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories for more heartfelt, emotional journeys just like this one. Here, we tell stories that heal, stories that uplift, and stories that remind us what it truly means to be human. Thank you for watching. And remember, even in the quiet, love speaks.
The soft hum of medical equipment filled the sterile air of room 509 at St. Clair's private hospital. The scent of antiseptic clung to the walls, mingling with the faint aroma of fresh flowers left by visitors who had long stopped coming. In the middle of the room, hooked up to machines that monitored every beat of his heart and every breath he took, lay Alexander Grant, a man who had once been the pulse of New York's business elite. But now he was just still. Emily Carter adjusted her gloves as she prepared to change Alexander's bandages. At 24, Emily had been a nurse for only 2 years, but her dedication and compassion made her stand out among her peers. She approached every patient with care, believing that no matter how hopeless a situation seemed, her presence could make a difference. And Alexander's case was the most challenging she'd faced yet. He had been in a coma for 6 months following a catastrophic car accident. His family, influential and cold, had spared no expense to ensure he received the best medical care, but their faith in his recovery had long since dwindled. To them he was a shell of the man they once knew, but to Emily he was still there, somewhere beneath the stillness. As she gently cleaned the wounds on his arms and adjusted the sheets, Emily spoke softly, as she did every day. "Well, Alex," she began, her voice light, "you wouldn't believe the morning I had. The coffee machine broke again, and I swear the universe is conspiring against me having caffeine." She chuckled to herself, even though she knew there would be no response. "But don't worry, I saved you from hearing me complain for too long." Talking to him had become second nature. It filled the silence, made the room feel less like a waiting tomb and more like a space where life still lingered. She told him about her day, her frustrations, the little victories, and sometimes even her fears. She wasn't sure why she felt so connected to him, but something about Alexander's peaceful, unmoving face made her believe he was listening. Just as she was about to finish adjusting the IV, the sharp sound of high heels clicking against the polished floor echoed through the hallway, growing louder until the door swung open with a force that rattled the walls. Victoria Grant, Alexander's mother, swept into the room like a cold wind. She was a woman who wore her wealth like armor, her designer clothes impeccable, her perfectly styled hair not a strand out of place. But her eyes, a piercing shade of ice blue, held no warmth. Emily straightened instinctively, masking her surprise. "What are you doing?" Victoria's voice was sharp, laced with disdain as her gaze swept over Emily, landing on the gentle way her hands rested on Alexander's arm. Emily removed her gloves calmly, placing them in the bin before turning to face Victoria. "I'm changing his bandages, Mrs. Grant." Victoria's lips curled into a sneer. "I didn't ask what you were doing. I asked why you are the one doing it. I told the hospital I wanted the best for my son, not some novice nurse playing caretaker." Emily's jaw tightened, but she kept her tone steady. "I understand your concern, but I'm assigned to Mr. Grant's care because I'm qualified to be here. I treat all my patients with the utmost care, regardless of their status." Victoria stepped closer, her heels clicking ominously against the tile. "You may fool the others with your sweet little bedside manner, but I see right through you. You're here because you're cheap, convenient, and expendable. Do your job and keep your personal feelings out of it. My son doesn't need your sympathy." Emily clenched her fists at her sides, willing herself to stay composed. She took a deep breath, meeting Victoria's icy glare with a quiet strength. "I'm here to help your son," Emily said firmly. "Whether you believe it or not, I will continue to care for him with the respect and dignity he deserves. I won't abandon him just because it's easier to give up." For a moment, Victoria's eyes flickered, as if Emily's words had struck a nerve. But just as quickly, the steel returned to her gaze. "We'll see how long that lasts," she muttered before turning on her heel and sweeping out of the room, leaving a trail of tension in her wake. The door clicked shut, and the silence settled back over the room like a heavy blanket. Emily let out a slow breath, turning back to Alexander. She smoothed the sheets over his chest, her hands lingering just a moment longer than necessary. "I'm sorry about that," she whispered, her voice softer now. "Your mother's well, you know." She pulled a chair up to his bedside and sat down, resting her elbows on her knees. The room hummed with the steady rhythm of the heart monitor, a sound that had become oddly comforting over time. "You know, I don't care what she says," Emily continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I believe you're still in there fighting, and I'm not going anywhere, Alex, I promise." As she sat there, the only sound was the beeping of the machines and the quiet, steady breathing of the man in the bed. But somewhere, deep in the recesses of Alexander's mind, something stirred. A faint flicker of awareness. Emily didn't know it yet, but her words were more than just a one-sided conversation. They were a lifeline, pulling Alexander closer to the surface, closer to the world he had left behind. And soon, everything would change. The days at St. Clair's private hospital blended into one another like watercolors on a damp canvas, soft, repetitive, and predictable. For most, room 509 was just another space where hope faded with each passing hour. But for Emily Carter, it had become the center of her world. It was on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the world outside seemed to hold its breath, that something different happened. Emily was carefully changing Alexander Grant's bandages, her hands steady from weeks of practice. She hummed softly, a tune she wasn't even aware she'd memorized, filling the sterile silence of the room. As she reached for a fresh gauze pad, she felt it, a faint, almost imperceptible twitch beneath her fingers. Her eyes darted to his hand, disbelief flooding her senses. Was that real? She stared, her breath caught in her throat, waiting to see if it would happen again. After a few seconds of nothing, she shook her head, dismissing it as her imagination playing tricks on her. Maybe it was just a muscle spasm, something involuntary. But as she continued her work, her heart beat a little faster, her mind replaying the moment over and over. Later that evening, as she prepared to leave, the image of Alexander's twitching fingers haunted her thoughts. Against her better judgment, she returned to his room, standing by his bedside, watching him as if willing him to move again. Nothing. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. The next morning, Emily approached Dr. Harris, the attending physician overseeing Alexander's case. She hesitated outside his office before finally knocking. "Come in," his deep voice echoed. Emily stepped inside, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Dr. Harris, I think I noticed something unusual with Mr. Grant yesterday." Dr. Harris raised an eyebrow, peering over his glasses. "Unusual?" "Yes," Emily nodded. His fingers, they twitched, twice. The doctor sighed, leaning back in his chair. Emily, we've seen involuntary muscle reflexes before in comatose patients. It's common. It doesn't necessarily indicate cognitive function. But this felt different, she insisted, her voice firm but respectful. It wasn't just a spasm. It was, she stopped, realizing how it sounded, hopeful, naive. Dr. Harris offered her a sympathetic smile. I appreciate your dedication, Emily. But you can't let yourself get too attached. I know it's hard, but sometimes patients don't come back. Emily swallowed hard, nodding, but as she left his office, she knew she couldn't let it go. From that day forward, Emily became more attentive. She spent every free moment at Alexander's bedside, gently stretching his limbs, massaging his muscles, and speaking to him as if he were wide awake. Good morning, Alex, she'd whisper, pulling back the curtains to let the sunlight spill into the room. You should see how beautiful it is outside today. I think you'd like it. She told him about the mundane details of her life, her annoying neighbor who always played loud music at 3 a.m., the elderly patient down the hall who called her sunshine, and how she missed her father, who had passed away when she was a child. She spoke of her mother's illness, the hospital bills that never stopped coming, and how exhausting it was to keep everything together. And even though he never responded, Emily felt like Alexander was listening. One evening, a heavy storm rolled through the city. The rain lashed against the hospital windows, and the steady drum of thunder vibrated through the walls. Emily's shift had technically ended hours ago, but she found herself unable to leave. Something about the storm made her feel like Alexander shouldn't be alone. She pulled a chair closer to his bed, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee. The only light in the room came from the dim glow of the heart monitor, casting soft green reflections on the walls. You know, she began, her voice barely louder than a whisper, I used to love storms. When I was little, my dad would let me sit by the window with him, and we'd count the seconds between the lightning and thunder. She paused, her gaze drifting to Alexander's still face. But after he died, storms just felt lonely. The words hung heavy in the room, mingling with the distant rumble of thunder. Emily set her coffee down and reached for Alexander's hand, holding it gently between her own. I don't know why I'm telling you this, she murmured, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. Maybe because you're the only one who can't tell me everything will be okay when it won't. Or maybe I just don't want to feel like I'm the only one still fighting. A tear slipped down her cheek, landing softly on the back of his hand. She wiped it away quickly, embarrassed by her own vulnerability, even in front of someone who couldn't hear her. But then it happened. A subtle, undeniable squeeze of her fingers. Emily's breath hitched. She froze, staring down at their intertwined hands, her heart pounding in her chest. Alex, she whispered, her voice trembling. Did you? She waited, her eyes wide, her pulse racing. But the moment passed, and his hand went limp again, as if it had never moved at all. Emily blinked back tears, unsure if she was imagining things, but deep down she knew what she felt. Something inside Alexander Grant was waking up. Over the following days, Emily became even more devoted, her belief unwavering despite the skepticism of her colleagues. She continued to talk to Alexander, to share her fears, her hopes, and her dreams, unaware that with each word, she was pulling him closer to the surface. And though he couldn't speak or move, yet Alexander was listening. In the depths of his mind, her voice was the anchor holding him steady in the storm of his unconsciousness. The warmth of her touch, the sincerity of her words, they were the lifeline pulling him back to the world. And soon the world would see the impossible happen. The morning sun spilled through the blinds of room 509, casting soft golden rays across the sterile white sheets. Emily Carter pushed the door open with her usual gentle touch, a cup of coffee in one hand and a clipboard in the other. It was just another routine day, or so she thought. As she stepped inside, ready to greet the man who had become more than just a patient to her, she felt an odd shift in the room. The familiar hum of machines was still there, but something felt different. She glanced at Alexander Grant, expecting the same peaceful stillness that had defined his presence for months. But her breath caught in her throat. Alexander's eyes were open. Wide, clear, and unmistakably aware, they locked onto hers with an intensity that sent a shockwave through her entire body. For a moment, Emily stood frozen, unsure if she was hallucinating from exhaustion, or if this was some cruel trick of her mind. But the longer she stared, the more undeniable it became. Alex, she whispered, her voice trembling, barely audible over the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. His gaze didn't waver. Those piercing blue eyes, once lifeless and distant, now shimmered with something unmistakably real, recognition. The coffee slipped from her hand, crashing to the floor and shattering, but she didn't even flinch. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mix of disbelief and overwhelming relief washing over her. She rushed to his side, her fingers fumbling to press the emergency button for assistance, but her eyes never left his. "Alex, can you hear me?" she whispered, reaching out to gently brush a stray lock of hair from his forehead. His lips moved ever so slightly, trying to form words that his body wasn't yet ready to produce. But his eyes, they spoke volumes. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she gripped his hand, feeling the faintest pressure of his fingers curling around hers. It wasn't strong, but it was real. "You're back," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're really back." The room soon flooded with doctors and nurses, their faces a mix of shock and professionalism as they rushed to assess Alexander's condition. Dr. Harris, who had long dismissed Emily's hopes, stared in disbelief as Alexander's eyes followed Emily's every movement, as if she were his lifeline in a sea of unfamiliar faces. But through all the chaos, Alexander's gaze never left Emily. Days passed and Alexander's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. Though his speech was slow to return, his mind was sharp, and his determination to heal was relentless. Physical therapy sessions were grueling, but he pushed through them with a focus that astonished the medical staff. But it wasn't the doctors or the specialists he sought after his sessions, it was Emily. Whenever she entered the room, a warmth flickered in his eyes. He'd track her movements with a subtle smile, his fingers tapping gently against the bed whenever she spoke, as if trying to respond even when his voice failed him. And when he finally could speak, the first words he whispered weren't to his family or his doctors. They were to her. It was late one evening, long after visiting hours had ended, when Emily found herself alone with Alexander. The hospital was quiet, save for the distant hum of machines and the occasional soft footsteps echoing down the hall. Emily sat by his bedside, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing patterns on the back of his hand as she recounted the day's events. "I swear if the coffee machine breaks one more time, I might lose it," she chuckled softly, glancing at him with a fond smile. "You'd think in a place like this, they'd at least get the basics right." Alexander's lips curled into a faint smile, and then, to her surprise, he spoke, his voice raspy but filled with warmth. "I heard all of it." Emily's breath hitched. She turned to him, her heart pounding. "What?" His eyes met hers, steady and sincere. Every word, every story. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision as the weight of his words sank in. "You kept me alive," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "You saved me." Emily's heart swelled, a mix of relief, disbelief, and something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name. She squeezed his hand gently, blinking back tears. "I was just doing my job," she whispered, though even she knew it wasn't the full truth. Alexander's eyes darkened slightly, his grip tightening ever so slightly around hers. No, it was more than that. As weeks passed, their bond deepened in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Alexander confided in Emily more than anyone else, sharing memories of his life before the accident, his fears about the future, and the loneliness he felt despite being surrounded by wealth and status. Emily, in turn, found herself opening up about her struggles, her father's death, her mother's illness, and the overwhelming pressure of trying to keep everything together. In Alexander, she found not just a patient, but a confidant, a friend. But with that friendship came an undeniable tension. Every lingering glance, every accidental touch, sent sparks flying between them. Emily tried to maintain professional boundaries, reminding herself that she was his nurse, nothing more. But her heart betrayed her with every beat. And Alexander felt it too. One evening, as the sun set and bathed the room in golden light, Alexander finally broke the silence that had been building between them. "Emily," he whispered, his voice stronger now, more certain. "I need to tell you something." She looked at him, her heart racing. "What is it?" He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch sent shivers down her spine. "You didn't just save my life," he murmured, his eyes locking onto hers. "You saved me. You pulled me back when I was ready to let go." Emily's breath hitched, her heart pounding in her chest. "And now," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "I can't imagine my life without you." Tears filled Emily's eyes, but she shook her head, her voice trembling. "Alex, I don't know what to say." "Say you feel it too," he whispered, his eyes pleading with hers. "Because I know you do." Emily closed her eyes, battling the whirlwind of emotions inside her. She had fought so hard to keep her feelings at bay, but now, with his heart laid bare before her, she couldn't deny it any longer. When she opened her eyes, she saw the truth reflected in his gaze, the same truth that echoed in her heart. "I do," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I feel it too." And in that moment, amidst the beeping of machines and the soft glow of the fading sun, they both knew their lives had changed forever. The sun had barely risen over St. Clair's private hospital when the storm rolled in, not from the skies, but from the polished marble hallways leading to room 509. Victoria Grant, sharp as ever in her tailored suit and icy demeanor, strode into her son's room unannounced, her high heels clicking against the tile like gunfire. Her eyes, the same piercing blue as Alexander's, immediately darted to where he sat propped up in bed, laughing softly at something Emily had just whispered. It wasn't just the casual intimacy of the moment, the way Emily's hand rested gently on Alexander's arm, or how his eyes sparkled in a way they never did when his mother was around. No, it was something deeper, something Victoria recognized but refused to accept. Her voice sliced through the warmth like a blade. "Well," she sneered, folding her arms across her chest, "I see the rumors weren't exaggerated." Emily stiffened, her heart leaping into her throat as she turned to face Victoria. The softness vanished from Alexander's expression, replaced by a guarded tension. "Mother," Alexander said coolly, his voice steady but laced with warning, "what are you doing here?" Victoria's gaze didn't leave Emily. I should be asking her that. She took a step forward, her eyes narrowing. "Tell me, Miss Carter, how long did it take? How long before you realized you could manipulate my son while he was at his weakest?" Emily's face flushed, a mix of shock and indignation surging through her. "Mrs. Grant, with all due respect, I have never." But Victoria cut her off, her voice rising. "Don't lie to me. You think I can't see what's happening here? You latched onto him while he was helpless, and now you're playing the heroine, hoping to secure a place in his will." Emily's breath caught. The accusation stung deeper than she expected. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but the weight of Victoria's words hung heavy in the room, suffocating. Alexander, sensing Emily's turmoil, snapped. "Enough, Mother." His voice boomed stronger than it had been in weeks. "Emily saved my life. She cares about me. This isn't about money, and you know it." But Victoria's eyes gleamed with cold satisfaction. "Of course she cares. Why wouldn't she? You're Alexander Grant, the millionaire who can give her everything she never had." The words echoed in the sterile room, and suddenly Emily felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't anticipated. Her heart pounded in her chest, but this time it wasn't from affection, it was from humiliation. She stepped back, her voice barely a whisper. "Is that what you think, Alex?" Alexander's head whipped toward her, his expression softening instantly. "No, Emily, you know I don't." But Emily shook her head, her eyes glistening. "Do I? Or am I just another project you felt obligated to care about because I was there when no one else was?" Alexander's face crumpled, the words hitting harder than any physical blow. "I need to go," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. Without another word, she rushed out of the room, leaving Alexander struggling to rise from the bed, his heart shattering with every step she took away from him. The days that followed were hollow. Alexander tried to reach out, calls, messages, even asking the hospital staff, but Emily had vanished. It was as if she had never been part of his life, leaving behind only the ghost of her presence in the sterile room that now felt colder than ever. Without Emily, the walls of the hospital felt suffocating. Alexander's recovery slowed, his motivation waning with each passing day. His therapist noticed, but he brushed off their concerns with forced smiles and empty reassurances. But at night, when the world outside grew quiet, the emptiness was unbearable. He would close his eyes and hear her voice soft, soothing, telling him stories about her childhood, her fears, her dreams. He missed the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, the warmth of her hand in his, the way she saw him, not the millionaire, not the patient, but him. And now, he wasn't sure he could face a life without her. Meanwhile, Emily tried to bury herself in routine, taking shifts at another hospital across town. But nothing could fill the void Alexander had left behind. She replayed their last conversation over and over, questioning everything. Did he really love me, or was it just gratitude? Did I let myself believe in something that was never real? But no matter how hard she tried to convince herself that leaving was the right choice, her heart betrayed her. She missed him, his stubbornness, his wit, the the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. At night she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he thought about her too, wondering if she had made a mistake by walking away. But the fear of being just another fleeting moment in his life kept her from returning. Weeks passed. Alexander, unable to bear the weight of his own heartache, finally decided to take matters into his own hands. With the help of his assistant, he organized a press conference, not for the media, not for publicity, but for her. He stood before the cameras, his heart racing, his hands trembling slightly, but his eyes burned with determination. "I'm here today," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside, "not to talk about my recovery or my business. I'm here to talk about the woman who saved my life." The room fell silent. "Her name is Emily Carter. She was my nurse during the most difficult time of my life. But she was more than that. She was my anchor, my hope, and the reason I'm standing here today." He paused, his throat tightening. "To Emily, if you're watching this, I need you to know what we shared wasn't just because of my condition. It wasn't gratitude. It was real. You saved me in more ways than you'll ever know, and I'm lost without you." Across town, in her small apartment, Emily sat frozen in front of the TV, tears streaming down her face. His words pierced through every doubt, every fear, and she realized the truth she had been too scared to face. She still loved him. Without another thought, she grabbed her coat and rushed out the door, her heart pounding with hope and desperation. Because some loves are too powerful to walk away from. And she wasn't going to lose him again. The bright lights of the press conference hall glared down on Alexander Grant, but he barely noticed. Standing tall behind the podium, dressed in a tailored suit, he looked every bit the powerful businessman the world knew him to be. But today he wasn't here as the millionaire mogul. Today he was here as a man stripped bare of pride and pretense. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward, their pens poised, expecting another story about his miraculous recovery or his return to the corporate world. But Alexander's gaze wasn't on them. His eyes, filled with a raw, undeniable emotion, stared straight into the cameras, as if trying to reach her. "I'm not here to talk about my company," he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "I'm not here to discuss my recovery or future business plans." The room fell silent, the anticipation hanging heavy in the air. "I'm here to talk about the woman who saved my life," he continued, his voice softening. "Her name is Emily Carter. She was my nurse, but more than that, she was my light in the darkest time of my life. When I was lost in a coma, it was her voice, her kindness, her strength that pulled me back." He paused, his throat tightening as he fought back the tears threatening to spill. "I didn't just wake up because of medical care. I woke up because of her. And somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't just grateful, I was in love." Gasps echoed through the room, but Alexander didn't care. "Emily, if you're watching this," he said, his voice trembling, "I need you to know, what we shared wasn't just circumstance. It was real. I love you. And I don't want to live another day without you." Miles away, in her tiny apartment, Emily Carter sat frozen in front of her old television, tears streaming down her cheeks. She could barely breathe as Alexander's words washed over her, breaking down every wall she had built around her heart. She thought back to every moment they had shared, his soft smiles, the way his eyes lit up when she walked into the room, the gentle way he had touched her hand. It wasn't just gratitude. It was love. She had been too afraid to believe it before, but now, hearing him confess it to the world, there was no denying it. Grabbing her coat, Emily rushed out the door, her heart pounding as if it were trying to lead her back to him. At St. Clair's private hospital, Alexander sat in the physical therapy room, his mind replaying the press conference over and over. Doubts crept in. What if she didn't see it? What if she didn't believe me? Just as he was about to lose hope, the door creaked open. He turned, and there she was. Emily stood in the doorway, her eyes glistening with tears, her breath shaky as she took him in. For a moment, neither of them moved, the world around them fading away. Then, with a surge of determination, Alexander pushed himself up from the chair. His legs trembled beneath him, the pain sharp, but he didn't care. With the help of his crutches, he took one step, then another, until he stood just inches from her. Emily's heart ached at the sight, but it was the look in his eyes that broke her completely. Raw, vulnerable, filled with a love so pure it made her breath hitch. Without thinking, she threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest as sobs racked her body. "I'm so sorry," she whispered through her tears. "I should have never left. I love you, Alex." I've loved you for so long. Alexander's arms tightened around her, his own tears falling freely now. You're here, he whispered, his voice cracking. That's all that matters. They stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace, letting the world fall away. In that moment, all the pain, all the misunderstandings, faded into nothing. All that remained was them. Months later, life had found a new rhythm. Emily opened a community health clinic, dedicating her life to helping those who couldn't afford the care they needed. Alexander, stepping away from the ruthless world of business, focused on charitable work, using his wealth to fund programs for underprivileged communities. But more importantly, they built a life together, a life filled with laughter, love, and healing. Their days were no longer defined by the walls of a hospital, but by the adventures they shared and the simple joy of being by each other's side. They weren't just lovers, they were partners, soulmates. And as they sat on the porch of their small countryside home, watching the sun set over the horizon, Emily rested her head on Alexander's shoulder, whispering the words that had brought them back to each other. You saved me too. And so, Emily and Alexander found not just healing, but a love that defied all odds, a love born in silence, nurtured through struggle, and solidified in the face of every obstacle life threw their way. Their journey reminds us that sometimes, the people who save us are the ones we least expect. And in the end, love isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing, it's about being there when it matters most. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to soul-stirring stories for more tales of love, resilience, and unexpected miracles. Turn on your notifications so you never miss a story that could inspire you or even change your life. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next heartwarming story.
Single dad CEO accidentally calls the wrong emergency babysitter. The woman who arrives is the one he's been waiting for. The boardroom lights flickered slightly as the storm outside rolled over the skyline. Aidan Walker stood at the head of a long glass table, sleeves rolled up, voice clipped as he pointed toward the projection screen. He was in the middle of finalizing a major acquisition deal, one that had taken months of negotiation. Suddenly, his phone buzzed on the table. It was the nanny's number. He frowned, excused himself with a brief nod, and stepped out into the hallway. "What is it, Marlene?" A panicked voice came through the speaker. "Mr. Walker, I am so sorry. I cannot get to Mia tonight. My car broke down and there is no way I can make it into the city." Aidan pinched the bridge of his nose. "You are telling me this now? My daughter is sick and I have another hour left in this meeting." "I called your assistant already. She said she would arrange a replacement." He ended the call, took a deep breath, and walked back into the meeting. He gave instructions to his VP, then checked his messages. A single text from his assistant blinked on his screen. "Found emergency sitter, Lucy's sister, on her way now." He pocketed the phone and left the office, stepping into the elevator with the calm of someone who lived in perpetual crisis control. He arrived at his penthouse 20 minutes later, loosened his tie and walked into the soft glow of the apartment. Mia was curled up on the couch under a blanket, cheeks flushed with fever, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. She looked up at him sleepily. "Daddy?" He knelt down beside her, brushing hair from her forehead. "I am here, sweetheart. You will feel better soon." The doorbell rang. He straightened up and walked to the door, expecting the usual uniformed professionalism of one of Lucy's colleagues. Instead, a woman stood there, drenched from the rain, hair pulled into a messy bun, holding a small tote bag and wearing a navy blue cardigan that looked more suited to a classroom than an emergency nanny call. She looked up at him, blinking water from her lashes. "Hi, I am Lily Harper. I got a message saying someone needed an emergency babysitter." Aidan frowned. "You are Lucy's sister?" She tilted her head. "Lucy? No, I think—" This may have been a mistake. There was a long pause. Then Mia coughed behind him, a weak sound that sent a twist through his chest. He opened the door wider. "Mistake or not, I need help right now. Can you stay? Just for tonight?" Lily hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." Within minutes, she had her coat hung up, shoes off, and was kneeling beside Mia on the couch, her voice soft and rhythmic as she spoke to the little girl. She checked her temperature with a gentle touch, helped her sip water, and whispered stories while rubbing her back. Aidan stood in the hallway, stunned. By the time he returned from retrieving fever medication, Mia had fallen asleep, curled against Lily's side. He handed over the medicine, quietly. "You seem to know what you are doing." Lily smiled without looking up. "I used to be a preschool teacher. I am taking a break." Aidan did not ask why. He only watched as Lily gently shifted Mia onto a pillow and pulled the blanket up to her chin. Later, in the kitchen, Lily brewed tea she found in the cabinet, while Aidan sat at the counter, still trying to figure out how this stranger had managed to calm his daughter faster than anyone else ever had. "I am sorry again," Lily said. "I really thought the message was from a family I used to babysit for years ago. I just showed up." He shook his head. "You showed up when it mattered." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Lily glanced toward the hallway where Mia was sleeping. "She is a wonderful little girl. You must be doing something right." Aidan let out a breath that sounded a lot like relief. "I try. Some days I feel like I am just surviving." "You are not alone in that." He looked at her more closely, noticing the tired edge to her kind eyes. "You seem good at this. Are you sure you are not still a teacher?" She smiled faintly. "It is complicated." He did not press. But something about her, her presence, her steadiness, unsettled the part of him that had learned to function without needing anyone. As the rain continued tapping against the windows, Aidan Walker, CEO of Walker & Co., realized that perhaps, for the first time in years, someone had stepped into his world and made it feel a little less empty. The apartment was quiet, the soft hum of the city far below, muffled by double-paned glass. Lily stood in the softly lit hallway, watching Mia sleep peacefully on the oversized couch, her tiny body curled like a comma beneath the thick-knit blanket. The fever had gone down slightly. Her cheeks, though still pink, were no longer burning. Aiden appeared beside Lily with 2 mugs of tea. "She's out for the night, I think," Lily whispered. He handed her a cup. "Thanks to you." She accepted it, warming her hands. She just needed someone to listen, and probably a little ginger tea. Aiden gave a quiet chuckle, rare and brief. "I should hire you on the spot." Lily raised an eyebrow. "That would be quite the job offer, considering I showed up here by mistake." "You showed up when no one else did," he said simply. They sat on opposite ends of the wide leather sofa in the living room. Between them, the city lights stretched endlessly, glittering and untouchable. Aiden leaned back, rolling his shoulders. Lily sipped her tea, her eyes moving from the skyline to the photo frames on the console table, one of Aiden with a younger Mia, another of a woman with bright eyes and a gentle smile. "She was beautiful," Lily said softly. Aiden followed her gaze. His voice lowered. "She was everything." A long silence followed. "I'm sorry," Lily said. "She passed away 2 years ago," he replied, not looking at the photo. "Cancer. It was fast. Too fast." Lily didn't say anything. She just nodded, letting the weight of the moment settle naturally. Aiden studied the tea in his hands. "Since then, it's just been me and Mia. Nannies come and go, schedules change. Life doesn't pause because you're trying to breathe again." Lily listened, really listened, not as someone curious, but as someone who understood the ache behind every word. "Do you get help? Family?" she asked. "Not really. My parents live across the country. Her parents—" He trailed off. "It's complicated." They both glanced at Mia, who let out a tiny sigh in her sleep. "Sho's strong," Lily murmured. Aiden nodded. "Stronger than me some days," Lily smiled, then hesitated before saying, "You're doing a good job." He looked at her, surprised. "You've known me less than 3 hours. 3 hours is long enough to see the way you looked at her when she cried, long enough to see the world stops when she needs you." Aiden's jaw flexed, emotion flickering behind his steady eyes. There was something in Lily's presence, a quiet steadiness that made it feel like it was okay to speak without fixing everything. "So," he said, shifting the subject gently, "why isn't someone like you in a classroom full of kids?" Lily hesitated. "I had a student," she began slowly, fingers tightening around her mug. "He got hurt. It was an accident, but I couldn't stop blaming myself, even when no one else did. I took time off, then more time, and I never went back." Aiden didn't interrupt. He just nodded slowly. "I think," Lily said after a long pause, "I forgot how to be around children without being afraid." He tilted his head slightly. "You didn't seem afraid tonight." She smiled faintly. Mia made it easy. They both fell quiet again, not uncomfortably, but in that strange space where 2 strangers start to feel a little less strange. Eventually Aiden stood. "You can take the guest room. It's down the hall. Mia sleeps better when someone's nearby, and I trust you." Lily blinked. "You sure?" He gave her a tired but sincere nod. "I haven't been sure about many things lately, but this feels right." She followed him to the hallway, pausing once more to glance at the sleeping girl on the couch. Aiden looked at her. "Thank you, Lily, for tonight." She smiled. "Thank you for letting me stay." As the door to the guest room clicked shut behind her, Aiden stood alone for a moment, staring at the space she had just filled. Something unfamiliar tugged at him, like the beginning of a question he didn't yet have the courage to ask, but somewhere down the hallway, a stranger was already making his world feel less like a burden and more like home. The next morning arrived quietly, with sunlight peeking through half-closed curtains. Aiden was already dressed in a fresh suit, pacing the kitchen with his phone pressed to his ear while pouring cereal into a bowl. Mia sat at the counter in her pajamas, swinging her feet and playing absently with her spoon. Across from her, Lily appeared in the doorway, dressed in her own clothes, simple jeans, a soft gray sweater, and her hair loosely tied back. "Good morning," she said gently. Mia's face lit up. "Miss Lily?" Aiden turned, surprised at the burst of excitement from his normally reserved daughter. "I guess someone's happy to see you." Lily smiled and walked over. "How's the fever?" "Gone," Mia said proudly. "I feel like pancakes." Aiden raised an eyebrow. "You barely ate toast last night." "I changed my mind," Lily chuckled. "Mind if I make her something? I'm kind of a pancake wizard." Aiden hesitated, then stepped aside. "Be my guest." Within minutes, the kitchen filled with the scent of vanilla and cinnamon. Mia giggled as Lily flipped the pancakes with flair, adding blueberries into the shapes of stars. "I didn't know we had blueberries," Aiden muttered. "I found them behind a wall of protein bars," Lily replied, tossing him a playful glance. He sat at the counter and watched as Mia devoured the breakfast. He had not seen his daughter this animated in weeks, not even with family, certainly not with hired nannies. After clearing the dishes, Lily turned to Aiden. "If you need help again today, I'm free." "You don't have other plans?" she shrugged. "Not anymore." Aiden studied her for a moment. The offer wasn't professional, it was personal somehow. She was choosing this, choosing them. "I'd appreciate that," he said. What started as one more day turned into 3, then a week. Lily became a part of their daily rhythm. She walked Mia to the park, taught her how to fold paper swans, and helped her practice her letters with glitter pens and way too many stickers. Aiden came home each night to laughter echoing down the hall, and stories he hadn't heard before. Stories Mia hadn't been willing to share with anyone. On a warm Saturday afternoon, Aiden invited Lily to join them at the farmer's market. They wandered through booths of fresh flowers and homemade jams, Mia holding Lily's hand as they admired a small puppet show. They bought lemonade and shared a giant cinnamon roll, which Mia insisted on feeding them in alternating bites. It felt, dangerously, like a real family. Later at the park, they spread a blanket under a tree. Lily leaned against the trunk, reading a storybook aloud, while Mia curled up beside her. Aiden watched them from the picnic basket, his heart twisting with something both beautiful and terrifying. As the sun began to set, Mia lay her head on Lily's lap and whispered something. Lily looked down, startled. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Mia repeated, a little louder this time. "Can you be my new mommy?" The words hung in the air like a delicate thread. Lily's eyes filled, her hand brushing Mia's hair. She glanced at Aiden, who had frozen completely. He didn't speak. Couldn't. Lily smiled softly and said, "That's a very big question, Mia. Let's keep having fun together, okay?" Mia nodded, content, and soon fell asleep right there in her lap. Aiden finally exhaled, walking over quietly. He sat beside them, not saying anything, just watching the two people who had quietly and completely upended his world. "She's never said anything like that to anyone before," he said finally. "I didn't know what to say," Lily admitted. "You said exactly the right thing." They sat in silence, the kind that no longer felt like strangers passing time. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something they were both afraid to name. But something had shifted, and they both knew this was no longer temporary. The following week passed in a blur of familiar routines. Breakfasts filled with laughter, afternoons at the library, evenings curled up with storybooks. On the outside, everything looked like a picture of happiness. But something had changed inside Aiden, and Lily could feel it. He was quieter now, more reserved. He still smiled when Mia clung to Lily's hand or proudly showed off a drawing they had made together, but there was a certain distance in his gaze, something she could not quite reach. One evening, as Mia napped after a busy afternoon at the aquarium, Aiden walked into the living room where Lily sat, sorting colored pencils, with soft music playing in the background. He cleared his throat. "Dinner's almost ready. You're welcome to stay if you want." She looked up and smiled. "I'd like that." But something in his tone made her hesitate. Later, as they sat at the table, Mia asleep in her room, the air between them felt heavier than usual. Lily gently pushed her half-empty plate aside and asked, "Is everything okay, Aiden?" He didn't answer right away. He poured himself a glass of water, stared at it, then said, "This, whatever it is we've built, it's starting to feel like more than I expected." Lily's heart skipped. "And that's a problem?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "No, but it's complicated. She nodded slowly, her fingers lacing together on the table. "You're afraid." "I'm terrified," he said honestly, "of letting you in, of Mia getting attached, of losing everything again." Her eyes softened. "Aiden, I never wanted to come into your life and replace someone." "You didn't," he said quickly, "but that doesn't mean I know how to do this. I lost someone and I've spent the last 2 years making sure Mia never felt that kind of loss again." "You're trying to protect her," Lily said gently, "and maybe protecting her means not letting anyone get close." Lily's throat tightened. "Including me." He didn't answer. The silence was its own kind of confirmation. Lily stood slowly, gathering her bag. "I think I should go." "Lily," he began, but she gave him a small, sad smile. "You don't have to explain. I understand. You're not ready." She walked toward the front door, paused, then turned back one last time. "I wasn't looking for a family when I showed up at your door that night, but somehow you became one. And I don't know how to walk away from that without it hurting." She left before he could reply. The apartment felt colder after she was gone. The next morning, Mia woke to find Lily's shoes missing from the hallway. She looked around in confusion, then found a small folded note on the table in the playroom. Her tiny fingers opened it slowly. "You are brave and kind, and I will always care about you. Love, Miss Lily." Mia clutched the note to her chest and began to cry. When Aiden came running in, she looked up with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Did Miss Lily leave because of me?" Aiden knelt beside her, wrapping her in his arms. "No, sweetheart. She left because of me." And for the first time in a long time, he realized something painful and clear. He had built walls so high around his heart that even love could not find its way in. And now, he had pushed away the one person who had made him believe it was okay to feel again. Days passed, then a week. The apartment was quieter. Too quiet. Mia stopped asking for Lily after the third night, but she carried the little note around like a talisman, clutching it in her small hands when she thought no one was watching. Aiden watched her, guilt eating away at him like rust. He still woke early, packed her lunch, dropped her off at preschool, and returned to his meetings like nothing had changed, but everything had. One afternoon, after a particularly lifeless meeting, Aiden sat at his desk, staring at a coffee cup Lily had once left on the shelf, a simple ceramic one with tiny sunflowers. She had said it reminded her of something warm, something she missed. His chest tightened. "I made a mistake," he muttered under his breath. Without thinking, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through contact after contact until he reached a familiar number. Not Lily's, she had never given it, but the sitter's service he thought he had called weeks ago. This time he asked directly, "Do you know where Lily Harper is?" There was a pause on the other end. Then a hesitant voice said, "She volunteers at Maple and Bloom Books downtown, part-time. She works with kids there sometimes." That evening, Aiden stood outside the small bookstore tucked between a bakery and a flower shop, heart thudding. Through the front window he saw her. Lily sat in the reading circle, cross-legged on a rug, surrounded by a small group of children. Her eyes sparkled as she read from a brightly illustrated book, her voice animated and full of life. She laughed, gesturing wildly, and the kids roared with giggles. Aiden couldn't move. She looked so herself. Alive in a way she hadn't been when she'd left. When the reading session ended, she rose to her feet, hugging a little girl goodbye before collecting the scattered books. As she turned toward the front of the store, her eyes met his through the glass. She froze. Aiden stepped inside slowly, hands in his coat pockets. "Hi," he said softly. Lily looked unsure, guarded. "Hi. I didn't come here to ask you to come back," he said. "I just needed to say thank you." She tilted her head. "For what?" "For giving Mia something I couldn't. For giving me something I didn't know I needed." Lily lowered her gaze. "You made it clear you weren't ready." "I wasn't," he admitted. "But losing you made me realize I might never be ready if I keep living in fear." She crossed her arms, but her expression softened. "Fear is real, Aiden, but so is love." He took a step closer, pulling something from his pocket. It was a bracelet, bright plastic beads strung unevenly with the letters MIA in the center. "She made this for you the night you left," he said. "She hid it under her pillow. I found it this morning." Lily's fingers trembled as she reached out and took it. "She misses you," he said. "We both do." "I miss her too," Lily whispered. Then, after a long pause, "And I miss you." Aiden's eyes glistened. "Lily, I don't want to pretend I have everything figured out. But I know this. When you left, everything felt empty." He exhaled slowly, voice cracking, just enough to betray the man behind the CEO. "I want to try. With you. With Mia. As a family. No walls. No hiding." She looked up, hope flickering like dawn behind her eyes. "I can't promise I won't be scared," she said. "I don't want perfect," he replied. "I just want real." She smiled then, soft and steady, and stepped into his arms. As he held her tightly, the bracelet pressed between their palms, Aiden knew he had just been given a second chance. And this time, he wasn't going to let go. Lily did not move back in, not right away. But she started showing up again, quietly, like a melody slowly returning to a forgotten song. She came over in the mornings before preschool, helped Mia pick out her socks, always mismatched on purpose, and packed little handwritten notes inside her lunchbox. Sometimes they said things like, "Be brave today," or "Remember, sunshine starts with you." Mia adored them, and Aiden did too, even if he never said it out loud. Their rhythm resumed, not rushed but steady. Pancake Saturdays returned, with flour on noses and giggles echoing through the kitchen. Movie nights resumed, with Lily curled on one side of the couch, Mia in the middle and Aiden on the other, their fingers brushing over shared popcorn. The apartment, once echoing with silence, now felt lived in again. It smelled of cinnamon and warmth, crayons and laughter. One evening, after Mia had fallen asleep mid-sentence during a bedtime story, Aiden walked out to find Lily sitting on the couch, flipping through a stack of the child's drawings. "She made these today," Lily said, holding up one. "Apparently I'm a superhero babysitter teacher lady." Aiden chuckled and sat beside her, looking at the picture. A stick figure version of Lily wore a bright pink cape, with Mia and Aiden on either side. "She's not wrong," he said, his voice soft. Lily studied the picture for a long moment, then placed it on the table. "I've been thinking about going back to teaching." Aiden looked at her with genuine surprise. "You ready?" "I'm scared," she admitted. "But yeah, I think I am." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing small circles over her knuckles. "I think the classroom's been missing you as much as we did." She smiled, a real one, and leaned into his shoulder. "The day you showed up at the bookstore, I remembered who I used to be, or maybe who I still am." "You're so much more," he whispered. They sat like that for a while, the silence between them full, not empty. Later that week, Aiden invited Lily somewhere unexpected. She hesitated when he mentioned the cemetery, but she said yes without pressing for details. They walked through the quiet tree-lined grounds until he stopped at a modest headstone. Emily Walker, beloved wife, cherished mother. Lily stood beside him, feeling the weight of memory in the air. "She was kind," Aiden said. "Brilliant. She made this place feel like a home. Losing her, it felt like the world just shifted off its axis." He took a breath, the cool air visible between his words. "For a long time, I thought loving again would be betrayal, that if I moved forward, I'd be letting her go." Lily looked up at him, eyes gentle. "But you showed me that hearts aren't graves. They can hold more than one love. They can grow. They can remember, and still welcome something new." She reached for his hand. "I'll never try to replace her," Lily said softly. "I don't want you to," he replied. "I want you to be exactly who you are." They knelt and placed a single sunflower beside the headstone, Lily's idea. "She would have liked you," Aiden murmured. "I hope so," Lily whispered. On the walk back to the car, their fingers intertwined naturally. It was not grand, not dramatic, but it was real. It was two people choosing to begin again, not from scratch, but from the broken places they had gently mended. Together, and in that choice, love was not reborn. It simply came home. Spring arrived with soft mornings and golden afternoons, and with it came something that felt very close to peace. Lily had officially accepted a part-time teaching position at a local preschool, just a few blocks from Aiden's apartment. She now walked Mia to school with her, their steps in rhythm, their laughter echoing through quiet streets. Some days Aiden would meet them on the way back, coffee in hand, pretending he had no ulterior motive beyond caffeine, though the way his eyes lingered on Lily said otherwise. One Thursday afternoon, Mia came home holding a golden certificate clutched tightly in her small hand. "Look," she beamed, "I was Student of the Month." Aiden lifted her in the air, spinning her in a slow circle. "That's amazing, sweetheart." Lily stood by, clapping enthusiastically. "You've been so kind to your friends and such a great listener. Of course they picked you." Mia's eyes sparkled. "We're having a ceremony. Will you both come?" "Wouldn't miss it for the world," Aiden said. The day of the ceremony, Mia stood on stage with her classmates in front of a small gathering of parents and teachers. She spotted Aiden and Lily sitting side by side in the front row, and she grinned so wide her cheeks puffed up. After the applause, she ran straight to them, throwing her arms around both. "I'm so glad you're both here," she whispered. Later that night, after dinner and cupcakes and a living room dance party, Aiden tucked Mia into bed. She clutched her stuffed bunny and whispered, "I hope Miss Lily stays forever." He kissed her forehead, the weight of her words pressing gently on his chest. "Me too, baby girl." When he returned to the living room, Lily was folding laundry, humming softly to herself. He watched her for a long moment before stepping forward. "You've become part of everything here," he said. She glanced up, cheeks pink. "I hope that's okay," he smiled. "It's more than okay." He hesitated, then added, "Will you have dinner with us this Friday? Just us, no toys, no TV, just a real dinner." Lily blinked. "Are you asking me on a date, Mr. Walker?" He smirked. "I believe I am." She grinned. "Then I'd love to." Friday night came, and Aiden had gone above and beyond. He wore a navy button-down, set the table with candles, and even tried to cook, though Lily gently saved the meal from total disaster. Mia sat in her special booster seat, declaring the pasta fancy, and insisted on giving a toast with her cup of apple juice. "To us," she said proudly. "Our family." Aiden and Lily exchanged a glance over flickering candlelight, emotion rising between them. After Mia went to bed, Lily stepped out onto the balcony, drawn by the cool air and the city lights. Aiden followed. "She's happy," Lily said. "She's happy because of you," Aiden replied. Lily shook her head. "Because of us." Aiden turned to her. "You've changed everything, Lily. You brought color back into our world." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Lily froze. "I'm not asking for forever tonight," Aiden said quickly, opening it to reveal a simple, elegant gold ring set with a single diamond. "I'm asking you to say yes to now, to waking up here, to pancakes, to books on the floor, to all of it, with me." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she whispered, "1,000 times yes." From the hallway, a sleepy voice called, "Did someone say pancakes?" They both laughed, and Aiden turned to Lily, placing the ring on her finger with a look so full of quiet love it could have made the stars weep. And in that moment, there were no missing pieces, no ghosts, no what-ifs, just them, together, and more than enough. 1 year later, sunlight poured through the trees of a quiet garden behind a brick townhouse in Brooklyn. White chairs lined a narrow cobblestone path, petals scattered underfoot, laughter bubbling gently in the air. The backyard wedding was small, intimate, just a few close friends, some colleagues, and Mia, who had declared herself flower girl, ring bearer, and boss of everything. Lily stood at the end of the path in a soft ivory dress, simple and timeless. Her eyes sparkled as she met Aiden's, standing beneath a canopy of white blossoms, Mia clinging to one hand, a bouquet in the other. When Lily reached them, Aiden took both of her hands in his. "You walked into my life by accident," he said, voice warm. "But loving you has been the most intentional thing I've ever done." Lily's voice trembled as she replied, I didn't know I could find home in someone else's arms. But you and Mia, you're the home I never dared to dream about." The officiant smiled and declared, "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Before he could say anything else, Mia shouted, "You can kiss her." Everyone laughed, and Aiden did. Their kiss was soft and certain, and Mia threw handfuls of petals into the air like confetti. The reception that followed was just as simple: folding chairs, fairy lights, mason jars with lemonade, and a chocolate cake Mia helped decorate unevenly. There were no press releases, no grand ballroom, no spotlight. Just love. 1 year later, the front window of a charming corner shop now read, "The Sunflower Library, Children's Books and Community Classes." Inside, Lily stood behind a table, guiding a small group of kids through a craft session. Crayons rolled across the table. Storybooks lined every wall. And in the back room, Aiden was reading to a circle of toddlers who hung on every word of The Very Hungry Caterpillar. At his feet sat a little boy with dark curls and wide eyes. Theo, not quite 2, with Lily's nose and Aiden's curiosity. Mia sat nearby, now a confident 6-year-old, reading aloud to Theo when his brother finished. "You're going to be a big reader like me," she told him matter-of-factly. One Saturday afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up in front of the store. Out stepped Charles and Margaret Walker, Aiden's parents. They had stayed distant during his early struggles, but time had softened them. Inside, Mia ran to the door. "Grandma! Grandpa! Want to meet Theo again?" They entered, tentative but smiling, and Lily handed Theo over carefully. Aiden's father held the boy awkwardly, unsure, but Theo reached for his tie and giggled. Something in the old man's face cracked. He looked down at his grandson, then up at Aiden. "You've built something good here," he said. Aiden simply nodded. "I had help." Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the brownstones, Aiden sat on the back steps of the shop, Lily leaning against his shoulder, Theo asleep in her arms. "You remember the night we met?" she asked. "You mean the emergency babysitter mix-up?" he teased. She nudged him. "That was chaos. Best chaos of my life." They sat in silence, watching fireflies blink in the garden. "I used to think family had to look a certain way," Lily murmured. "But now I know it's just love. That's all it's ever been." Aiden kissed the top of her head. "And this is the kind I never thought I deserved." Theo stirred, and Lily hummed softly to settle him again. Inside, Mia arranged books on a shelf labeled Staff Picks by Mia Walker. One of the titles was How Families Are Made. Not by blood, but by showing up, by staying, by loving, even when it's hard. And under a painted sign that read, "You belong here," the Walker family, messy, loud, imperfect, had found everything they had ever needed: each other. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey. Aiden, Lily, Mia, and little Theo reminded us that family is not always about perfect beginnings, but about the people who choose to stay, to love, and to build something real out of unexpected moments. Sometimes, a wrong number leads to the right person, and sometimes love finds us when we least expect it, but exactly when we need it most. If this story moved you, made you smile, or stirred something deep in your heart, we invite you to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. Every week we bring you new tales of love, healing, resilience, and the quiet magic of human connection. Hit that subscribe button and let us keep touching your soul, one story at a time.